When this veteran exposed the government's failure, Pam Bondi had two choices: walk away or fight back. She chose the one no one expected. The conference room at the Tampa Convention Center was packed. Rows of reporters, flashing cameras, and murmuring onlookers filled the space. Pam Bondi stood behind the podium, polished as ever, her signature blonde hair neatly styled, her expression unreadable. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and prepared to address the topic that had been dominating headlines for weeks: veteran healthcare funding cuts. This wasn't just another press event. The air carried something heavier: frustration, distrust. People weren't just here to listen. They were here to push back. "Good afternoon," Bondi began, her voice even, controlled. "I understand there have been concerns about the recent policy adjustments. I want to take a moment to clarify the facts." Her words barely made it past the first sentence before a sharp voice cut through the air. "Clarify? We don't need clarification. We need action." A man stood up near the middle of the room. The crowd shifted, eyes snapping toward him. He wasn't just any attendee. He wore a faded Vietnam veteran cap, its stitching frayed at the edges. His face was lined with years of service and struggle, his hands gripping the chair in front of him like he was holding himself back. Bondi paused, her lips pressing together in a tight line. Security near the doors tensed, waiting for a signal. The reporters, sensing a moment, leaned in. The man's voice wavered, but it wasn't weak. It carried weight, the kind that comes from decades of being overlooked. "My name is Richard Lawson. Served 24 years in the U.S. Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I came back and found myself fighting a different kind of war, the one right here, at home. The VA won't return calls. My buddies can't get the care they were promised. And now you're telling us we need to cut back?" A few people nodded, others muttered. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion in his face. Bondi exhaled slowly. "Mr. Lawson, I respect your service. These decisions are never easy, and I assure you, I don't need your respect," he interrupted. "I need my brothers to stop dying in hospital hallways because of red tape." His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. "You politicians love shaking our hands during elections, but when we come to you for help, suddenly there's budget constraints." A hush settled over the room. Even the reporters stopped typing. Bondi shifted her weight, her fingers tightening on the edge of the podium. "I hear your frustration, and I don't take it lightly." Lawson let out a bitter chuckle. "Oh, you hear me? Well, that makes one of us. Because every time we try to speak, all we get is a press conference full of empty promises." Someone near the back clapped. Another voice murmured, "He's right." For the first time, Bondi's composed mask wavered. Her eyes flickered toward her staff, who were already exchanging uneasy glances. This was turning into something bigger than a tense exchange. But then, instead of backing down or deflecting like many expected, she did something no one saw coming. But no one, not even Lawson, was prepared for what happened next. A charged silence settled over the room. The tension wasn't just in the air. It was in every glance, every clenched jaw, every tightened grip on a pen or microphone. Pam Bondi stepped away from the podium. Not much, just enough to make it clear she wasn't going to hide behind it. She met Richard Lawson's eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice steady but lower now. "We do a lot of talking, but I want to hear your reality. Right now, tell me exactly what you and your fellow veterans are dealing with." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a political dodge. She was throwing it back to him. Lawson hesitated, as if he hadn't expected her to actually listen. He shifted his stance, rubbing his fingers over the stitching of his cap. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke. "I had a friend, Mike Davidson, Marine, served in Desert Storm. A year ago, he started having chest pains. Nothing too bad at first, just tightness here and there. He went to the VA. They told him it was stress, sent him home with some ibuprofen." The room was silent except for the clicking of cameras. Lawson's throat bobbed. 2 months later, he collapsed in his kitchen. His wife found him. Massive heart attack. Turns out it wasn't stress. It was a blocked artery. But because he was just another name on a waiting list, he didn't get the tests he needed, didn't get the surgery he needed, and now he's dead. A sharp exhale came from somewhere in the audience. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Lawson's voice grew rougher. "That's one story. You want more? I got plenty. Like my buddy Ray, Vietnam vet, lost his leg in '68, gets an infection in his prosthetic socket last year, goes to the VA. They keep him sitting in the waiting room for 8 hours. By the time they see him, the infection's spread. They take the rest of his leg. He's in a nursing home now. Guy used to be the toughest man I knew, and now he's wasting away in a damn recliner because the system failed him. Bondi's face stayed unreadable, but her posture shifted. Less stiff, less defensive. Lawson let out a breath, shaking his head. I don't need to stand here and beg for pity. I just want an answer. I want to know how the hell we got here. How we went from people calling us heroes to being treated like burdens. His voice cracked on that last word. Bondi took a slow step forward. I don't have an easy answer for you, Mr. Lawson, and I won't insult you by pretending I do. He folded his arms. Then what are you going to do? Bondi didn't look at her staff, didn't check with her advisors. Instead, she did something that caught everyone off guard. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small notepad, and flipped it open. I want names, she said. I want cases. I want real people, real situations, and I want to take them straight to the people in charge of fixing this mess. Lawson blinked. You what? You said the system is broken. I want to see exactly how, where, and why, she said, her voice firm. So I want you to give me cases, real ones, right now. The room shifted again, but this time the energy was different, less combative, more curious. Lawson stared at her as if trying to decide whether this was some elaborate political stunt or something real. Then slowly he nodded. Fine, I'll start with Mike Davidson's widow. You want her number? Bondi extended her notepad. I do. The cameras caught every moment, the roughness of Lawson's hands as he scrawled out a phone number, the way Bondi's fingers tightened around the notepad as if she understood the weight of what she'd just set in motion. But this was only the beginning, and not everyone in that room believed she meant it. The conference room felt different now. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, mutated into something raw, unpredictable. People weren't just watching a press event anymore. They were witnessing something that felt like it could change things. Pam Bondi gripped the notepad, scanning the names Lawson had scribbled. The pages felt heavier than they should, like they carried something more than just ink. She looked up. How many more? Lawson's eyes narrowed. What? You said you had plenty of stories, she said. How many more? His jaw tightened. You really want to know? She nodded. I wouldn't have asked otherwise. Lawson exhaled through his nose, his gaze flicking toward the crowd. A few people were whispering, some reporters furiously typing on their phones. Then, with a measured breath, he pulled out his own notepad. It was small, worn, its pages bent from being stuffed into a pocket one too many times. This is a list of vets in my community, he said, his voice lower now, more controlled. Men and women who are dealing with this system every damn day. Some can't get appointments. Some are fighting paperwork battles they'll never win. Some won't be around much longer if nothing changes. Bondi held out her hand. Lawson hesitated. He wasn't sure if he trusted her, not yet. But something in her face, something he hadn't expected, made him hand it over. She flipped through the pages, skimming name after name. Some had notes beside them. Denied benefits. PTSD claim rejected. 18-month wait list. No response from VA. She looked up. Are any of them here? Lawson's brow furrowed. What? I want to talk to them, she said simply. Right now. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. This wasn't normal. Politicians didn't do this. They took notes, nodded solemnly, promised to look into it. They didn't ask for real-time conversations. A few reporters exchanged glances, already prepping headlines. Lawson scanned the room. His hesitation was clear, but it wasn't fear. It was something closer to disbelief. Then a voice spoke up from the back. I'm one of them. All eyes turned toward a woman standing near the exit. She looked to be in her late 50s, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her navy blue t-shirt had an old army emblem faded across the front. Lawson straightened. Angela? She stepped forward. Yeah. Bondi shifted to face her. Tell me your story. Angela swallowed, crossing her arms over her chest. I did 2 tours in Iraq, honorably discharged. Came home with injuries that didn't seem bad at first, but over the years, they got worse. I applied for disability benefits, denied. Said my injuries weren't directly related to combat. Her fingers tightened around her forearm. I appealed. That was 4 years ago. Haven't heard a damn thing since. Bondi didn't flinch, didn't look away. Who's handling your case? Angela let out a bitter laugh. That's the thing. No one. It got lost in the system twice. Had to start over from scratch. Meanwhile, I'm working 2 jobs just to keep up with my medical bills. Lawson muttered something under his breath. Bondi reached for her phone, opened her contacts, and turned the screen toward Angela. Give me your case number. Right now. Angela blinked. What? I'm going to call the regional VA office, Bondi said, and I want them to explain to me in real time why your appeal has been sitting in limbo for 4 years. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Reporters started whispering to their colleagues, cameras zooming in. Angela hesitated, glancing at Lawson. He gave her a small nod. With a deep breath, she pulled out her wallet, dug through a stack of folded papers, and handed over a battered form. That's my claim number. Bondi took it, dialed a number, and pressed the speakerphone button. The ring echoed through the room. 1, 2, 3. Veterans Affairs Office, Tampa Regional Branch. This is Lisa speaking. How can I help you? Bondi didn't waste time. Lisa, this is Pam Bondi. I'm standing here with Angela Hayes, a veteran whose appeal for disability benefits has been stuck in your system for 4 years. I want to know exactly what's going on. Silence. Then a nervous shuffle on the other end of the line. I'd need to pull up her file. I'll wait, Bondi said. The entire room held its breath, but no one was ready for what the woman on the other end was about to admit. The room was so quiet that even the faintest shuffle of feet felt loud. Every single person, journalists, aides, attendees, had their eyes locked on the phone, waiting. There was a long pause before the voice on the other end hesitantly responded. Just give me a moment, Lisa said, clearly caught off guard. The clatter of a keyboard could be heard through the speaker. Pam Bondi's expression didn't change. She stood still, waiting, her grip firm around the phone. Angela's fingers tightened around the edge of her t-shirt. More typing. Then Lisa cleared her throat. Okay, I have the file here, she said, her voice tinged with nervous energy. It looks like Ms. Hayes' claim was initially denied due to a lack of direct combat-related injury documentation. Then, another pause. Bondi's tone remained even, but there was an edge to it now. Go on. Lisa inhaled sharply. It appears the appeal was marked for review in early 2021, but the case was, another pause, then a quiet exhale. Closed due to clerical error. Angela's face twisted in confusion. Wait, what? Lawson cursed under his breath. A few journalists exchanged glances, already typing frantically. Bondi narrowed her eyes. You're telling me this woman's appeal was closed due to a clerical error, and no one bothered to notify her? The voice on the other end grew even smaller. It should have been refiled automatically, but I don't see any record of that happening. Angela let out a short, bitter laugh. So what? I've been sitting here waiting for 4 years over a mistake. Lisa stammered. I don't. Bondi cut in, her voice sharp now. Who's in charge of these appeals at your office? Lisa hesitated. That would be, Director Mason, but I want his number. A long, uncomfortable silence. I don't think I can. I was Attorney General of this state, Lisa, Bondi said, her voice firm. I know what you can and can't do. I'm asking for a direct contact to the person responsible for fixing this. Lisa swallowed audibly. I can have him call you. No, I'll call him, Bondi said. And while you're at it, I want this claim reopened. Today. The weight of her words sank into the room. Angela stared at her, still processing what had just happened. Lawson, arms crossed, nodded slightly to himself. I'll escalate the request, Lisa said quickly. I'll send it over right now. Bondi nodded once. Good, and I expect an update before the end of the day. Click, the call ended. The silence stretched. Then Angela exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand over her face. I don't even know what to say. Lawson stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief. I'll be damned. Bondi glanced around, her voice clear. This isn't just about Angela. This is about every veteran who's been stuck in the same bureaucratic nightmare. I want names. I want cases. And I'm going to make sure they're handled. Angela blinked at her. You actually mean that? Bondi met her gaze. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't. The room buzzed with murmurs, journalists whispering, cameras capturing every second of the moment. This wasn't a rehearsed speech. This wasn't damage control. It was something else. Lawson exhaled, shaking his head. If you actually follow through on this, I'll admit I was wrong about you. Bondi didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply extended the notepad again. Then help me make sure it gets done. But outside this room, the firestorm was just beginning. By the time Pam Bondi walked off that stage, the internet had already erupted. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media. Lawson's raw frustration, Angela's heartbreaking story, and Bondi's unexpected decision to personally intervene. Some people called it political theater. Others saw it as real leadership. But everyone was talking about it. By that evening, major news outlets were running headlines. Pam Bondi faces off with veteran, then shocks everyone. Former AG calls VA office live. Is she serious or just playing the game? Veterans speak out after bombshell press conference. Angela's name was trending. So was Richard Lawson's. And then the responses started rolling in. Veterans across the country flooded comment sections in news segments with their own stories. Some were furious, echoing Lawson's sentiment that politicians only cared when cameras were rolling. Others felt a flicker of something they hadn't in years. Hope. Talk shows debated whether Bondi had genuinely changed her approach or if this was all a carefully orchestrated moment. Political analysts dissected the footage, scrutinizing her every move. Some praised her for stepping up, while others questioned if she'd actually follow through. Lawson, however, wasn't interested in talking heads. He was too busy picking up his phone. His number had gotten out somehow. Not fully doxed, but veterans from all over were finding ways to reach him. "You don't know me," one man said in a voicemail, his voice rough with age. "But I saw you stand up today. I just wanted to say thank you." Another message came in an hour later. "My brother killed himself last year waiting on a response from the VA. Wish he'd seen this before he gave up." Lawson clenched his jaw. The calls didn't stop. Neither did Bondi's. She spent the next 48 hours making calls to VA offices, congressional contacts, anyone who had power to cut through the mess. Her staff was overwhelmed, blindsided by the amount of backlash and praise coming at them from all sides. Then, late the next night, Bondi's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. A low, gravelly voice came through the line. "This is Director Mason." Her grip tightened around the phone. "Glad to hear from you, Director. I assume you know why I'm calling." A pause, then a sigh. "You put me in a hell of a position today." Bondi leaned back in her chair. "No, I didn't. Your office did that when they let Angela Hayes' claim disappear." Another pause. Finally, Mason spoke again. "We're reopening her case, effective immediately." Bondi's lips pressed into a thin line. "And the others?" "That's complicated," he admitted. "We have thousands of pending appeals. I can't just push them all through overnight." She exhaled through her nose. "Then let's start with a review, a real one." Silence stretched between them. Then Mason said something that caught her off guard. "I don't disagree with you," he admitted. "The system's a mess, but I don't run the whole damn thing. If you really want change, you need to take this fight higher." Bondi leaned forward. "How high?" Mason's next words made her sit up straight. "You want answers? You need to take this to Congress." The words hung in the air like a challenge. But taking this fight to Congress meant stepping into a battlefield even she wasn't sure she was ready for. Pam Bondi sat in her office, the city lights of Tampa glowing through the window. The weight of everything that had happened over the past 48 hours pressed down on her. The phone call with Director Mason still echoed in her mind. "You want answers? You need to take this to Congress." That was the last thing she had expected. It was one thing to challenge a regional VA office, to hold a press conference, to make a few high-profile calls. But Congress? That was another level. She let out a slow breath, glancing down at the notepad on her desk. The same one Richard Lawson had scribbled names into. Dozens of veterans, all with stories just like Angela's. Was this really just another political moment? Was she getting in over her head? Her phone buzzed, a text. "Richard Lawson, just saw the news. If you're serious about this, I'll stand with you. But you better not back out." She stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Pam Bondi, I don't back out." The next morning, Bondi held a private meeting at a local veterans center. No cameras, no reporters. Just her, Lawson, Angela, and a handful of other veterans who had reached out. Angela, still reeling from everything, sat with her arms crossed. "You really think you can get Congress to care about this?" Bondi leaned forward. "I don't know, but if we don't force the conversation, no one else will." Lawson gave a short nod. "All right then, where do we start?" Bondi exhaled, thinking. "We build momentum. Public pressure is the only thing politicians can't ignore. We gather more cases, we put faces to the names, and we demand a congressional hearing on the failures of the victim. A scoff came from the back. An older man, probably in his 70s, shook his head. You don't think people have tried that before? Bondi met his eyes. Not like this. He studied her for a long moment. Then finally he leaned back. Fine, but if you drop the ball, you'll be just another politician who used us for a headline. Bondi didn't flinch. Then let's make sure I don't. A week later, the pressure reached Washington. The footage from the press conference had gone viral. Veterans organizations were releasing statements. And then a senator from Florida, one Bondi had worked with in the past, made an announcement. A formal congressional hearing would be held to investigate VA mishandling. Bondi sat in her office, staring at the headline on her laptop. She had wanted change. And now she had a shot at it. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Lawson. Richard Lawson, this is bigger than I thought, but we're in this now. She smirked slightly, shaking her head before responding. Pam Bondi, yes, we are. A month later, Bondi sat in Washington, waiting to testify before Congress. The notepad was still with her, but this time it wasn't just names. It was proof, stories, documentation. As she walked toward the chamber, Angela caught up with her. You nervous? Bondi glanced at her, then ahead. No, because this isn't about me. She stepped inside. The room quieted, and the fight for real change began. Politics is full of moments, some real, some orchestrated. But every once in a while, something happens that forces people to pay attention. Pam Bondi may have started this as just another press conference. But what happened that day became something much bigger than her. Whether she was a hero or an opportunist, that was for the world to decide. But one thing was certain. The conversation had started, and now there was no turning back. If this story made you think, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world.